Before I tell you how a helicopter landed on my sister's wedding lawn in the middle of my mother's cruelest speech, I need you to picture something. A woman in a champagne-colored gown standing in front of 200 guests, a microphone warm in her hand, a smile so practiced it looks like part of her jewelry, and 13 years of buried evidence sitting quietly inside my coat pocket less than 10 feet away from her. She thought she was about to bury me in public. She did not know the man in the sky already knew every lie she had ever told about me. She did not know a dispatcher named Naomi had kept a document in a cardboard folder for over a decade. She did not know her own daughter had seen something through a car window during a hurricane and had been carrying that memory, like a piece of broken glass, ever since. She thought this was a wedding. It was actually the last night she would ever hold a microphone in a room that belonged to her. Stay with me, because what you are about to hear did not begin at that wedding. It began on a flooded road in September of 2012 with an old woman at an upstairs window and a phone call that should never have been made. My name is Mara Whitaker. That night in January, my sister Brooke was getting married inside a glass pavilion on the edge of the Atlantic. The wind outside was bending the dune grass flat against the dark lawn. Inside, the heaters hummed. Forks paused above porcelain. Champagne flutes caught the amber light, and my mother, Connie Whitaker, walked to the microphone the way a prosecutor walks to a podium. She looked around the room. She smiled at the guests. Then she turned toward me. Brooke found a wonderful man who adores her, she said. Some women know how to build a life people want to join. Others spend years blaming everyone else because no man wants them. The laughter that followed was thin. A few guests looked down at their plates. Brooke sat beside her new husband with one hand frozen around her flute. She did not stop our mother. Luke Mercer, my brand new brother-in-law, stared at Connie the way a man stares at a crack running straight through the center of the family portrait he had just married into. I set my glass down carefully. My phone lit beside my plate. 6 minutes out. That was all it said. And that message is the reason my mother's smile was about to disappear. I did not stand up. I did not throw my drink. I did not reach for the microphone. I did not ask anyone to defend me, because I already knew what was coming through the sky, and I knew that my mother had no idea. You keep asking about my husband, I said. Funny thing. You have already met him. Connie laughed a small tight laugh meant to reassure the guests that her difficult daughter was performing again. Of course I have, she said. And where is this husband, Mara? Did he get lost on the way to the wedding? That was the moment the glass behind her began to vibrate. At first it sounded like distant construction. A guest tilted his head. Another one lowered a fork. The venue manager crossed the pavilion and quietly closed the doors leading outside. 2 ground staff members in reflective jackets moved along the fenced perimeter of the private heliport. The wedding band stopped playing. No one rushed onto the grass. We all just stayed there behind the glass while a helicopter descended into a pool of white landing lights beyond the dunes. The rotor wash flattened the grass. The bare branches trembled. The centerpieces shivered. And Connie, for the first time all evening, lowered the microphone. She had no line prepared, because whoever was inside that helicopter had not been on her list. The rotors slowed. A ground attendant stepped forward. The passenger door opened. A tall man in a charcoal overcoat climbed down and steadied himself against the rail. Silver at the temples. Calm in the way of a man who spends his life making decisions while other people panic. His name was Gabriel Rourke. His company, Rourke Response Systems, had recently been valued at more than $6 billion. He still owned more than 80% of it. Financial magazines estimated his personal fortune around $5 billion. But my mother was not staring at a billionaire. She was staring at a face she had last seen in a hospital corridor 13 years earlier under fluorescent lights and rainwater. She was staring at the man she had once whispered a lie to. And that lie had followed me through my entire adult life. He walked toward the pavilion. The doors opened. Cold air slid across the marble floor. He did not scan the room. He did not stop for the guests who were beginning to whisper his name. He came directly to my table. He rested one hand on the back of my chair. He looked down at me and he said, "Sorry, I missed dinner." Wife. I almost smiled, because in 5 words he had answered every accusation my mother had spent a lifetime building. Then he looked up. He looked at Connie. And he said the sentence that would break her open in front of everyone. The last time we met you gave me a story I should have verified. The room went still, but this is not where the story ends. This is barely where it begins. Because to understand why a billionaire flew across a coastline to say those words at a wedding reception, you need to go back with me. 6 months, then 8 weeks, then 13 years. Back to a hurricane. Back to an old woman in a blue cardigan pressing her hand against an upstairs window. Back to the exact moment my family decided that the truth was too expensive to keep. Let me take you to that garage first, because that is where it all quietly restarted. It was the first week of December, 6 weeks before Brooke's wedding. I was sitting in a parking garage outside a hospital in Virginia. My rental car smelled like exhaust and wet wool. A fluorescent light flickered above the windshield. On my keyring hung an old orange plastic tag scratched at the edges and worn smooth in one corner. It had belonged to my grandmother Eleanor. It was her accessible evacuation registration tag. It had hung from her walker on the night she was almost left to die. I had carried it for 13 years like a private failure. That was the moment my phone chimed. An email from a woman I had not spoken to in almost a decade, Naomi Bell, the dispatcher who had been on duty the night of Hurricane Celeste. The subject line was 1 line long. A mission code, my mission code. I did not open the message right away. I sat there in the flickering light, listening to that orange tag tap against the metal key. Because I already knew. Somehow, before I even read a single word, I already knew that the past had just cracked open, and that once I opened that email, I would not be able to close it again. I opened it. Naomi wrote that she was sorting old records before moving into a smaller house. In an old Union grievance folder, she had found a duplicate incident card from the night of the storm. She wanted to know if I remembered the mission code. She wanted to know if I had ever seen the original call history. I stared at that email for a long time, because for 13 years the official position of the entire world had been that no cancellation had ever happened. That there were no calls, that there were no recordings, that my memory was contaminated by family conflict. And now, a woman I had barely spoken to since the storm was quietly telling me that a piece of paper from that night had been sitting in her closet the whole time. I did not text her back. I did not call her. I did not tell my husband. I emailed her from a private account and I asked her 3 careful questions. Where had the document been stored? Who had touched it? Did she still have the envelope from the grievance file? Because I do not design evacuation plans for a living for nothing. I know the difference between finding evidence and preserving evidence. One is an emotion, the other is a case. Less than an hour later, Naomi answered. The card had never left her personal Union grievance file. She had been legally allowed to keep it. She photographed the front and the back beside the dated file index. And what I saw when the image loaded made me put the phone face down on my thigh and just breathe for a moment. The mission code matched. The date matched. The hurricane matched. The source line listed Greyhaven's main landline, the number that had sat beside the front desk of my family resort since I was a child. The first entry was a request for assisted evacuation. Elderly female. Oxygen. Second floor. 57 minutes later, a second entry. Assistance cancelled. Caller states resident already removed. I read those 2 lines again, and again, and again. The orange tag clicked softly against the car key in my hand. I did not yet know whose voice was on that call. I did not yet know if the audio still existed. I did not yet know if anyone would ever agree to reopen the mission file. But I knew one thing that no one had ever been able to prove before. Someone inside Greyhaven had picked up the phone. Someone inside my family had made that second call, and whoever it was had lied to a dispatcher while my grandmother was still upstairs breathing through a nearly empty oxygen tank. But here is where it got worse. Because 3 days later, while I was still deciding what to do with that card, my phone rang. It was my sister Brooke. And she had not called me in over 10 years. She sounded careful. Every sentence sounded rehearsed. I am getting married in January, she said, at Greyhaven. I looked at Naomi's image still open on my laptop. I said congratulations. Then Brooke took a small breath, and she said the sentence I had been waiting to hear. My entire adult life, without knowing I was waiting. Mom wants the family together. She says it is time to put the past behind us. Now let me explain something. People only ever say that sentence when they want the injured person to stop asking what happened. I did not accept the invitation right away. I told her I needed everything in writing. The invitation, the schedule, the lodging. Brooke laughed a nervous little laugh and said I still treated everything like an emergency plan. She was not wrong. That night, while she thought I was considering her invitation, Naomi sent me the protected copy of the incident card. And an hour after that, I sat down at my kitchen table with a glass of water and I understood exactly what had just happened. Greyhaven had not invited me home to reconcile. Greyhaven had invited me home because they needed something from me, and I had 8 weeks to figure out what. I called back 2 days later. I asked Brooke a simple question. What does Greyhaven need from me? There was a long silence on the line. I could hear a drawer close in the background. She said this is not supposed to be a business conversation. I said then the answer should be easy. She exhaled. The resort was renewing its insurance. There was also a state coastal resilience grant, and our mother had included grandmother's rescue in the application. As a case study, as a success story, as proof that Greyhaven had transformed one unfortunate misunderstanding into a model of institutional safety. Brooke told me the grant administrator had asked for confirmation from anyone named directly in the case study. I asked her if any of this had been sent to me in writing. She said no. I asked her what the document was called. She said she did not know the exact title. I said send it to me. She said this is my wedding, Mara. I said Greyhaven is using your wedding to put me in the same building as a document your mother once signed. Brooke told me I always assumed the worst. I told her I always asked what people wanted before I entered a room with them. Then she used the sentence my mother had trained her to use. 43 employees depend on Greyhaven. If the insurer refuses to renew, the lender can declare default. And that was the moment I understood exactly which version of my mother's game we were playing. Because she had never learned a new one. If I refused, I would not just be protecting myself. I would be threatening jobs, families, the property my parents had spent their lives rebuilding. I told Brooke I would not discuss or sign anything during her wedding. I said I would attend because she invited me as her sister. I said those conditions could not be combined. She did not promise to send me the document. She ended the call without saying goodbye. And the next morning, I did something I had not done in 13 years. I started to build a case. I did not tell Gabriel yet. That was a mistake. I will come back to that mistake later because it almost cost me my marriage. But first I contacted my attorney, Allison Price. I asked her to send preservation notices, quietly, precisely, to the Atlantic Coastal Rescue Cooperative, to its former insurer, to the state grant administrator, to Greyhaven Retreat itself. Those notices did not accuse anyone of fraud. They identified the mission code. They stated the historical incident was disputed. They asked that records, portal logs, document versions, correspondence, and archived audio not be destroyed. And I added one line that would matter more than I understood at the time. If any document appeared bearing my name, my signature, my professional title, or my consent, the recipient had to verify it directly through my attorney before relying on it. I did not know yet that my mother would try to forge my name, but I had lived with her long enough to write the sentence that would one day expose her when she did. I booked a hotel 12 miles from Greyhaven. I reserved my own rental car. I would not sleep under my parents' roof. I would not depend on their vehicles. I would not let them decide when I could leave. Then I emailed Brooke, Connie, and Thomas together, and I told them plainly, I will not sign documents at the rehearsal, or the ceremony, or the reception, or any private meeting. Any proposed statement must be sent to my attorney in advance. My attendance is not consent. My father Thomas answered instead of my mother. His email was 3 paragraphs of polite warning. Legal threats could endanger the insurance renewal, trigger scrutiny under the loan agreement, damage the employees. I sent one sentence back. Preserving records is not a threat unless someone plans to alter or destroy them. And then late that same night, Gabriel came home. He stood at the kitchen island with melting snow darkening the shoulders of his jacket. He did not sit down. He set a copy of Allison's preservation notice on the counter. His name was in it, because his old report was in it. And he looked at me and he said, "You reopened the Celeste record." That was the beginning of the hardest conversation of my marriage. I told him I asked to preserve it. He told me I had made a decision involving his own professional record without telling him. I told him I had known they would notify him. He told me that was not the same as hearing it from his wife. He was not loud. He never was. Gabriel does not raise his voice to gain control, which is exactly what made it harder to argue with him. I washed my hands at the sink even though they were already clean. It gave me something precise to do. "Your involvement makes this harder," I said. "The moment people see your name, they will say I used your company and your money to intimidate my family." "Then we document that I did neither," he said. "You do not know my family. I know what it is like to learn about your plans from an attorney." He was right. I had married a man who had spent years being lied about in public, and here I was, going behind his back the moment my past came calling. He rested both hands on the counter. He said something I will never forget. "You are right to protect the record. You are right not to let my position become the story. But you are using independence to avoid deciding whether you trust me. I married you. That answered whether you love me. It did not answer whether you will let me stand beside you when the outcome is uncertain." The words hurt. Because they were accurate. I told him I was still going to Greyhaven. He told me he had never asked me not to go. He would not contact the grant office, the insurer, the lender, my family, unless required as a witness. He would not arrive with lawyers. He would not turn my case into a display of influence. Then he asked me for one thing in return: no more surprises involving his old report. I agreed, and the very next afternoon, the document from Greyhaven arrived in my inbox. Its title was Incident Attestation and Limited Name Use Authorization, and when I read the first paragraph, I felt the temperature of my entire body drop by about 10 degrees. The document was not a state form. It was not required by the insurer. Greyhaven's own private consultant had drafted it. The language asked me to confirm 3 things: that Eleanor had voluntarily remained behind, that the rescue was the result of a misunderstanding during chaotic conditions, that no intentional misrepresentation had occurred. It also asked me to authorize Greyhaven to use my name, my former title as a rescue pilot, and photographs of me in its grant materials. The final paragraph stated that I did not object to Greyhaven presenting the incident as evidence of institutional resilience. I saved the original file. I exported the email header. I copied the complete version history. And then I opened the properties panel, and what I found there stopped my hand on the mouse. The document had been created 11 days before Brooke ever called me. Thomas had added the sentence claiming I had agreed in principle 4 days before my sister asked me if I would come home. Let me repeat that so you feel it the way I did. The wedding invitation had never been their first step toward reconciliation. The wedding invitation had been step 3. They had already written the document. They had already told the consultant I was on board. They had already assumed I would sign. And then, and only then, did they send my sister to invite me to her wedding. My family had been planning to use me as a signature months before they ever pretended to miss me. And now they were counting down the days until I walked into that resort and picked up the pen. I could have refused and stayed home. That would have been the safe choice. It would also have been the choice that let them submit whatever version of me they wanted while I was 3 states away. So I packed. I went. On the afternoon before Brooke's wedding, I drove up the coast in my own rental car. The winter sky was colorless. The Atlantic was gray. Salt drifted across the parking lot in thin, cold sheets. Greyhaven looked cleaner than any place holding 13 years of lies had any right to look. Fresh cedar shingles. Wide railings. Small glass lanterns. A brass plaque near the entrance thanked Connie Whitaker for her leadership in community disaster preparedness. Beneath her name, the plaque listed 3 words: resilience, responsibility, service. I read those 3 words twice. I locked my car. The orange tag on my keyring tapped against the metal, and that small sound carried me back into a place I had spent years trying to leave. Let me take you there. September 2012. Before Greyhaven had a heliport. Before it had backup generators. Before it had public safety awards. before it had a carefully edited story about what happened that night. I was 26 years old. I was flying for the Atlantic Coastal Rescue Cooperative. Celeste had weakened slightly overnight, but its outer bands were already pushing rain across the barrier islands. The main road near Grey Haven was expected to close by noon. The voluntary evacuation order had become mandatory. I called my mother from the cooperative's temporary base. "Where is Grandma?" I asked her. Connie sounded distracted. Doors were slamming in the background. Thomas was shouting about fuel. Brooke, who was 19, was asking whether someone had packed her garment bag. Eleanor left with the Bells, my mother said. They had room in their van. I asked, "Did you see her get in?" My mother said, "Mira, I am trying to evacuate an entire property. I am not your dispatcher. She is safe. Focus on your job." And she hung up. That was all I knew that day. What I did not know was that at that exact moment, 2 calls had already been placed from Grey Haven's front desk. 2 calls that were about to sit inside an insurer's archive for over a decade, waiting for me to become brave enough to find them. What I did not know was that my sister Brooke would later tell me she saw Grandma standing at an upstairs window while the family van pulled away. What I did not know was that my father Thomas had spent the last hour loading financial files and insurance records into the rear cargo area of that van instead of loading his own mother into a seat. And what I did not know most of all was that when a medical alert lit up my mission board less than an hour later, my mother had already made the second call. And she had already told the dispatcher that Eleanor was gone. The alert came from Eleanor's medical device. It identified her unit, her location, a low oxygen emergency. It was still transmitting from the second floor of Grey Haven. Gabriel sat in the second pilot seat beside me. He was 31. Qualified as second in command, serving as onboard mission lead. Lena Ortiz, our flight medic, stood behind us. "Dispatch canceled an earlier request from that address," Gabriel said. "The medical alert is newer," I replied. "The patient is still there." Lena leaned between our seats and studied the weather display. "That next band is moving faster than forecast," she said. "Now, listen to me carefully. Because this next part is the part my family has spent 13 years lying about. We did not launch because Eleanor was my grandmother. We followed the same process we would have used for anyone else. I was pilot in command." Gabriel confirmed the mission had a verified life safety basis. We checked the current wind, projected gusts, fuel, visibility, alternate landing sites, crew readiness, and time. Conditions were within our operating limits. Narrowly. The better window was already closing. "If we go, we commit to the alternate field on return," Gabriel said. I said I agree. Lena tightened the strap on her medical bag. She said, "I want the cabin secured for a rough approach." No one argued. No one was ordered into that aircraft against their judgment. We understood the risk. We agreed that leaving a confirmed oxygen-dependent patient inside Grey Haven was the greater danger. We lifted off. And the sky was already turning. We reached the resort under a low ceiling. The access road had flooded. Grey Haven's current heliport did not exist yet. We used an old maintenance field east of the main building. The ground was wet but firm. I kept the aircraft running while Gabriel, Lena, and the rescue technician crossed toward the rear entrance. The wind rocked the fuselage in small, uneven movements. I listened to their radio traffic and I counted minutes. Entering the main stairwell, Gabriel reported. A short time later, Lena, patient located, conscious, confused, oxygen nearly depleted. I closed my eyes for less than a second. Then I opened them and returned my attention to the instruments. They found Eleanor beside the upstairs window, her walker angled toward the door, her portable oxygen tank almost empty, the orange evacuation tag still hanging from the walker's frame. And when Lena asked her why she had not left with the family, my grandmother said 7 words that I would hear inside my head for 13 years. "Connie told me the air crew would come after they got Brooke across." Gabriel and a technician carried her down in an evacuation chair. Lena followed with the oxygen equipment. Rain swept the field. We departed for the alternate field inland. The forecast had placed the strongest gusts behind us. They arrived sooner than expected. The aircraft lurched as we crossed the edge of the next band. I corrected. I told Gabriel to prepare the cabin for a hard landing. He repeated the instruction to the crew. There was no panic. Just movement. Confirmation. And the flat discipline of people who understood that fear does not alter procedure. The alternate field appeared through the rain. I brought us down harder than I wanted. But inside the survivable envelope, the gear absorbed the first impact, the aircraft shifted, struck again, then settled at an angle. And that was when a secured medical unit slipped inside its bracket and struck Lena across the shoulder and upper back. My grandmother lived. My flight medic lost her career in the air. And I was about to lose 13 years of my own to a sentence my mother would whisper to Gabriel in a hospital corridor, while I was still changing out of wet clothes in a treatment room down the hall. What she said to him is the reason he wrote a single sentence in his report. 10 words long. Family conflict may have compromised the pilot's judgment. 10 words. That was all it took to end everything I thought I was going to become. But that is not the worst part of that hospital corridor. The worst part is what she did next. And I did not learn it for another 13 years. Back to the winter, I flew home for Brooke's wedding. Back to me, standing in the renovated Greyhaven lobby. Because I am not going to keep pretending that timeline is straight. Grief does not move in straight lines. Neither do families like mine. Brooke approached me in her cream rehearsal dress. She said you came. I said I would. Her eyes dropped briefly to the orange tag in my hand. She recognized it. Her face tightened. She did not ask why I still carried it. She said the rehearsal starts in 20 minutes. She said, Mom wants to see you in the management office first. I told her I had already told all 3 of them in writing that I would not discuss documents during wedding events. She said it will only take a minute, which is usually how people describe a boundary they are already planning to ignore. I followed her down the hall anyway, because refusing to enter that office would not make the pressure disappear. It would only let my mother tell everyone I had shown up looking for a fight. Brooke stopped outside the conference room. She said I need to check on the florist, and she walked away. I stepped inside. Nobody was in the room. On the center of the polished wood table sat a white document box, tied with a silver ribbon, arranged like a wedding gift. Through the clear lid, I could see a printed copy of the incident attestation, a black fountain pen, and a yellow note in my mother's familiar handwriting. Signed before the rehearsal dinner. That is who my mother is. A woman who can wrap a demand inside a ribbon and describe it later as a present. And that is when the door behind me opened. Connie carried 2 coffee cups. She placed one beside the box. She did not sit. I thought we could begin again, she said. I did not reach for the coffee. I did not touch the box. I said Brooke told me the rehearsal starts soon. She said this will only take a moment. If you do not make it difficult. I said you left a false statement with a pen and a deadline. She said I left a clarification that protects this family and the people who work here. She told me Eleanor had not voluntarily remained behind because Eleanor had refused to leave until she found several things she thought were missing. She told me I did not understand how stubborn my grandmother could be. I looked at my mother. I said Eleanor was upstairs with almost no oxygen. She survived because I went back. My mother said yes. As if that should have satisfied me. In her version, survival erased abandonment. A rescue transformed the choices that had made it necessary. Then Thomas walked in. He carried a leather folder. He sat at the head of the table as if the meeting had been scheduled with my consent. He opened the folder and turned it toward me. Ownership structure. Loan documents. He tapped a paragraph marked Insurance Covenant. He said if the carrier refuses renewal, the lender can require corrective management. Demand additional collateral. Declare a default. Then, submit an honest application, I said. He said an honest application will make it sound as though we deliberately abandoned Eleanor, and that was the moment his face changed. Because I looked at him and I said you did. And for the first time in 13 years, my father Thomas Whittaker did not deny it. He just stood up. He pushed the box toward me. He said this is not an admission of wrongdoing. This is a limited clarification. My mother folded her arms. She said if the lender replaces management, employees will panic. Vendors will tighten their terms. Bookings will cancel. Are you prepared to explain that to every person downstairs? I said the covenant becomes dangerous because you are risking the renewal with inaccurate submissions. My signature will not solve that. It would move part of the liability onto me. I said I will attend the rehearsal. I will not sign. My mother lowered her voice. She said then, "Do not pretend you came here for Brooke." I walked out before either of them could turn the argument into another circle. I did not know yet that the worst part of that trip had not started. Because the box on that table was not their only plan, it was the polite version. The other version was already sitting in a printer tray somewhere down the hall. And Luke Mercier, my sister's fiancé, was about to find it. Now, this is where the story slows down, because what happened next did not happen in one dramatic burst. It happened in tiny cracks. Small confessions, whispered pieces, like ice cracking under a slow winter thaw. That night, I returned to my hotel. I opened the folder my attorney had created for the Greyhaven documents. I saved everything. Hash values, version histories, email headers. Then at 10:17 at night, an email arrived from my father. Subject line, revised language for final review. He had attached a new version of the statement. He had copied Brooke, Connie, the grad consultant, and me. And beneath his email, he had accidentally left the entire earlier chain. I want you to sit with that for a moment. My father had forwarded me by mistake every message my mother had sent to the consultant, plotting how to make my presence at the wedding look like reconciliation. The consultant had warned Connie that without my direct confirmation, Greyhaven should remove my name and stop describing the rescue as an uncontested success. My mother had responded that photographs could provide supporting context, that my face beside Brooke's at the ceremony would help establish credibility, that the wedding was the last opportunity to keep me in the application. My attendance had never been enough. My face was another document they intended to submit. My smile was going to be Exhibit A. I forwarded the entire chain to my attorney. I saved the headers. And then I sent Brooke one question. Did you know they plan to use wedding photographs this way? She did not answer that night. The next morning, Greyhaven hosted a private family breakfast in a room overlooking the dunes. I arrived 10 minutes late on purpose. I wanted the room settled before I walked into it. I heard my father's voice before he saw me. She cannot leave the property again until this is resolved, he was saying. You need to keep her here after the ceremony. Tell her you want photographs. Tell her you need help with your dress. Whatever works. Luke turned away from Connie. He said, "Keep who here." And that was the moment my father saw me standing in the doorway. Brooke's face drained of color. Luke looked at all four of us and he said, "Is he talking about Mara?" Nobody answered. Nobody had to. My father tried to recover. He said it was a poor choice of words. We need time to reach an understanding before the filing deadline. Luke faced Brooke. He said, "What filing deadline?" And in that moment, I watched my sister stand at the intersection of the woman she had been raised to be and the woman she had promised to marry. She gripped the back of a chair. Her eyes went from Luke to Connie to me. She did not say no. She never said no. She just did not lie fast enough. And Luke saw it. Luke saw all of it. He walked closer to her, not angry, not cruel, just careful, like a man realizing he might not know the person he was about to marry. He said, "Did you know all of this before you invited her?" And that was the moment my sister finally cracked. She said yes, only that. Yes. Quiet enough that the heating vent almost swallowed it, but everyone heard, everyone. My mother tried to step in. She said Brooke was trying to repair a family relationship before beginning her marriage. Do not punish her for wanting peace. Luke looked at his phone. He looked at the email thread I had forwarded. He said, "Peace does not require a grant consultant." My father lowered his voice and said, "This discussion can wait until after the wedding." Luke replied, "That is what everyone keeps saying. Wait until after the rehearsal. Wait until after the rehearsal. Wait until after the deadline. Meanwhile, you are asking Mara to sign something she says is false." My sister looked at me. She said I wanted you here for more than the document, and I told her I believed part of her did. But I was done offering complete trust in exchange for partial truth. I told them I was leaving for the morning. I would come back for the scheduled wedding events. I would not discuss the statement again. My father stepped toward me. He said, "You cannot keep walking away every time a conversation becomes uncomfortable." I said, "I walked into your conference room. I read your document. I answered you. Refusing to repeat the same conversation is not walking away." I got in my car. And I drove to Betrayal. Because Naomi Bell was waiting. Now here's where the ice cracked wide. Naomi was already at Allison's temporary office when I arrived. She had brought the original union grievance folder sealed inside a document case. We set up a camera above the conference table. We recorded the opening. She identified the folder, the grievance number, the closing letter from the cooperative, the reason she had legally been permitted to keep the copy. And then she opened it. The incident card, the envelope it had been stored in, the union letter closing the grievance. Allison sealed the card in a clear sleeve. Naomi signed a short statement explaining how the card had come into her possession. Only after all of that did I ask her what I had been holding in my mouth for weeks. "Did you recognize the voice on that second call?" Naomi shook her head slowly. She said, "It was 13 years ago, Mara." She said, "I remember a woman. I remember she sounded irritated that I kept asking questions. I will not pretend I can identify her from memory." And that answer, that careful, honest answer, that was what made me trust her. Because Naomi understood the difference between remembering and proving. Then she said something that changed everything. She said Lena Ortiz's injury triggered a workers' compensation claim and a subrogation dispute between the cooperative, its insurer, the equipment vendor, and Greyhaven's insurer, which meant that radio traffic and call recordings related to the mission might have been exported into an insurer's archive. "Might have been," Naomi repeated. "Do not build your whole case around it." I said, "I know. I have made that mistake before." Then Naomi mentioned one more name. Walter and June Bell. The neighbors my parents had claimed took Eleanor. Their van. Their reimbursement filing. The certified passenger list. I obtained the county reimbursement file that afternoon, and I want you to hear the names on that list because 13 years of my family's public story die in this paragraph. Walter Bell. June Bell. Their adult son. 2 guests from a nearby rental house. And 1 elderly neighbor from the south end of the island. Not Eleanor Whitaker. My grandmother was not on the Bell's passenger list. Their van had already crossed the checkpoint 22 minutes before my mother called dispatch to cancel the rescue. When June Bell joined us by video that afternoon, she was calm and precise. She said, "Connie asked whether we had room early that morning. We told her we had 1 seat left. The person had to be ready when we passed Greyhaven." Allison asked if anyone brought Eleanor downstairs. June said no. We waited near the service entrance for about 7 minutes. Thomas came out and said they had made another arrangement. Allison asked whether Connie or Thomas had later claimed Eleanor had ridden with them. June said not until the insurance investigator called. She said, "I told him she was never in my van." There it was. The alibi my family had leaned against for 13 years. Gone. And I still had not opened the archive. I still had not heard the voice on that call. I still had not spoken to Lena Ortiz. And Lena was the one I was most afraid to face. I drove to Lena's house that same evening, west of the Sound. 40 minutes from Greyhaven. A wooden ramp led to her front porch, even though she walked without a cane. When she opened the door, her left shoulder sat slightly lower than her right. She was 47 now. 13 years after the rescue, she had chronic nerve pain, reduced rotation in her shoulder, damage in her lower spine. She trained emergency medical crews now. She had never flown again. She did not hug me. She said, "What do you need me to sign?" I said, "Nothing today." She said, "That usually means something next week." She led me into the kitchen and remained standing while I sat at the table. She had lived inside the consequences of that report for 13 years. Every morning, when her fingers were numb, every time she needed help getting something down from a shelf, every time someone told her she was lucky to still be walking, I told her the truth. I said I treated you like part of the missing evidence. I said I should have come sooner and asked what you needed from me instead of what you remembered. She said, "You did not come at all." I said no. She asked why. And I gave her the answer I had rehearsed for years and had never spoken out loud. I said because I thought you blamed me. And Lena looked at me across her kitchen table. And she said I did blame you. She said she had believed I pushed the mission because Eleanor was my grandmother. She said she had believed Gabriel had let me do it because he trusted me. She said she had spent years wondering whether her body was the cost of a family argument. I did not defend myself. I did not offer a document. I just sat there. And then she asked me what I wanted. I said the chance to show her the complete timeline when we had it, and then let her decide whether she wanted any part of correcting the record. She opened the folder. And we spent the next hour going through everything. The next morning, she agreed to join a video conference with my attorney and an independent aviation safety consultant named Elaine Porter. 25 years reviewing rotorcraft incidents. Elaine did not tell us what we wanted to hear. She compared the cooperative's weather archive, airport observations, radar reconstruction, flight data, and the time the mission was first opened. Even if we had launched after the first request, turbulence and rain would still have been possible. No responsible analyst can say the hard landing would not have occurred. Lena leaned toward the screen. She said, "Can you say the delay increased the exposure?" Elaine said yes. Based on the available data, the later launch placed the aircraft closer to the period of stronger gusts and reduced the margin for the return leg. The cancellation was a contributing factor in the risk environment, not a single proven cause of the injury. That distinction mattered. My mother had not reached through time and moved the medical unit that struck Lena. Equipment. Weather. Aircraft movement. Landing decisions, all of those belonged in the analysis, but the false cancellation had taken away almost an hour of safer conditions. It had not merely changed a line in a file. It had changed the environment in which we flew. Lena agreed to provide a statement, but only if Elaine's careful conclusion stayed intact. She said, "I will not trade one simplified story for another." I said, "Neither will I." After the consultant ended the call, Lena stayed on the screen. And then she told me the thing I had never known. She said Connie came to see me after I was discharged. She brought flowers. She sat beside my bed. And she told me you had always needed to prove you were the most capable person in the room. She said you ignored the family because rescuing Eleanor gave you a chance to be right. Lena said she told me you had used the crew to settle something with your mother. I sat perfectly still, because in that moment I understood something that 13 years of records could not have taught me. My mother had not just poisoned Gabriel's report in a hospital corridor. She had walked from bed to bed, person to person, whispering the same story into every ear that could carry it. She had built the accusation against me by hand, one conversation at a time. And I had let her. Because I had thought avoiding Lena was a form of respect. I said out loud what I finally understood. I said I let Connie keep you isolated from me. You helped her by staying away. Lena said yes. She rubbed the base of her thumb where the nerve still troubled her. She said, "Do not mistake this for us repairing everything." I said I will not. She signed the limited authorization that afternoon, and we sent it to the insurer's archive custodian, expecting nothing back for days. 3 hours later he called. 3 hours. The mission packet had been preserved under legal hold because the workers' compensation claim had overlapped with the subrogation dispute I already told you about. The archive contained the flight data, radio export, dispatch materials, equipment reports, witness correspondence, and submissions from Greyhaven. He would not release anything until the authorizations and chain of custody were reviewed. He agreed. And then he read us the archive index. Most of it was routine. Weather export, crew report, medical unit inspection, flight data summary. And then he reached 2 entries that made me stop writing. One was labeled Thomas Whitaker submission. The other was labeled dispatch audio export. My father had submitted something to the insurer that I had never seen, and the recording that everyone in my family had spent 13 years pretending did not exist was sitting in that archive, right next to it. I set my pen down. I did not speak for a moment, because I finally understood what I had been walking toward. My mother's voice was in that archive. My father's signature was in that archive. My father's signature was in that archive. And they had no idea I was about to find both. On the morning of Brooke's wedding, Gabriel arrived at my hotel room shortly after sunrise. He had flown into Dare County Regional Airport for a coastal evacuation drill. He was scheduled to depart for Grey Haven after the drill in his company's helicopter. He removed his overcoat. He set it across a chair. He looked tired. He did not ask to postpone the conversation. I had printed 3 things: the original report, his corrected memorandum from 2017, and the certified index from the insurer's claim archive. The documents lay in 3 separate folders on the desk. He picked up the original report. He found the sentence without searching. He said I should not have written this. I said you believed it. He said I believed it was possible. I said you put it in an official report. He said yes. He did not tell me he had been young, exhausted, shaken by Linus' injury. All 3 things were true. None of them changed what his words had done. And then he told me, in his own words, what my mother had said to him. She had described me as competitive, angry, determined to prove I was more competent than everyone else. She had told him family conflict may have compromised the pilot's judgment. And Gabriel repeated the sentence he could not take back. He said I did not ask her how she knew. I did not verify who took Eleanor. I did not ask dispatch why the first mission had been cancelled. I said you knew the alert was real. He said yes. I said you knew the mission had been approved. He said yes. I said, and you still made me the unstable variable. He said I cannot defend that. I had imagined hearing him say those words for years, and when he finally said them, they did not feel like relief. They felt like the last brick coming out of a wall I had been living inside since I was 26. Then he opened the second folder, the corrected memorandum from 2017. He had written it 5 years after the storm during a safety review involving delayed evacuations at private coastal facilities. He had noticed that Eleanor's medical alert occurred after dispatch had already marked the Grey Haven request cancelled. The sequence made no sense if Eleanor had truly left with a neighbor. He had requested the materials. He had received an incomplete archive. He had written a corrected memorandum stating that the family conflict sentence had not been supported by verified evidence and should not be used to evaluate my conduct, and he had sent it to me. I remembered opening that email while sitting in a rehabilitation hospital in Richmond. I had read his apology once. I had saved the memorandum, and I had declined his request to meet. Because I was not ready, he had waited. He had not called me 100 times. He had not sent flowers. He had not turned my forgiveness into a project. Almost a year later, Rock Response Systems became the technology contractor on a hospital evacuation project, where I served as an independent safety consultant. He walked into the first planning meeting. He saw me at the opposite end of the table, and he asked the project director whether I wanted him replaced. I told the director that changing personnel would delay the work. Then I told Gabriel his presence did not give him the right to discuss Celeste with me. He respected that boundary for 6 months. We argued about generator placement, ambulance loading zones, patient tracking systems. He never treated agreement as proof of loyalty. When I found a failure point in his company's system, he corrected it instead of explaining why I had misunderstood. Trust returned in pieces too small to feel dramatic. That is how real trust returns. In pieces. Never in one moment. We married in June of 2024 at a courthouse in Virginia. Lena was not there. My parents were not told. Brooke received no announcement. We ate dinner afterward with 4 friends and returned to work the following Monday. The secrecy had protected something important. It had also concealed the weakness I had not liked admitting until Gabriel put it into words that morning in the hotel room. I said I did not tell my family because they would have treated you as evidence that I had finally become worth respecting. He said that is a good reason not to invite them. I said it is the only reason. He said no. He said you also did not tell them because you knew the truth would change the balance of power. You wanted one part of your life they could not touch. I turned toward the window. Winter rain darkened the parking lot, and I understood that my husband had watched me build a life that my family could never enter, and he had helped me build it. And now he was going to help me end the version of me that had needed to keep the door locked. Gabriel's attorney joined us by secure video. A mobile notary verified his identity. watched him sign the sworn affidavit. The document described the hospital conversation, the report sentence, the lack of verification, the corrected memorandum. He did not claim my mother had committed a crime. He did not state that my parents intentionally endangered Eleanor. He admitted that his own report had given unsupported credibility to their account. When the notary ended the session, Gabriel checked his watch. He said, "I need to leave for the drill." Then he asked me something quietly. He said, "If Connie attacks you at the reception, do not answer by announcing the investigation." I said, "What do you want me to do?" He said, "Tell the truth if someone asks you a direct question. Do not display documents. Do not mention the archive audio. Do not make this look like a billionaire arrived with a verdict. I am not the verdict." I said, "I know they may not see it that way." He put on his overcoat. He said, "I will follow your lead." He touched my cheek. He kissed my forehead. And he left. And my phone rang before the door had closed behind him. It was Brooke, and what she was about to tell me, what she had been holding on to for 5 years. That was the confession that would break the last of my family's foundation. I almost let it go to voicemail. Then I remembered the way she had gripped the chair at breakfast. The way she had failed to deny what she knew. I answered. For several seconds I heard only her breathing. Then she said, "Mara." I lied when I told the review I could not remember. I sat down beside the folders on the desk. I said, "What do you remember?" Her voice broke. And she gave me the sentence I had waited 13 years to hear from her. I saw Grandma in the upstairs window. Brooke's confession did not come all at once. She gave me one sentence and then stopped, as if the rest might still be pushed back into the place where she had kept it for 13 years. She said Dad was driving, Mom was in the passenger seat, I was in the back with the bags. We had just reached the end of the service road. Something struck the glass. I thought a branch had hit the car, but the sound came from Greyhaven. Grandma was at the second floor window. She had one hand against it. She was wearing the blue cardigan she always kept near her oxygen chair. I said, "What did you do?" Brooke said, "I told Mom Grandma was still inside." The line went quiet. I heard fabric moving as Brooke shifted the phone. She said, "Mom said the rescue team is already coming. She said the road could close at any minute. That if Dad turned around, all of us might become trapped. She told me Grandma had agreed to wait because the air crew could move her more safely. And I asked my sister the question that would define everything that followed. I asked her, "When did you learn it had been cancelled?" Her breathing changed. She said, "I waited. 5 years ago. 5 years. Not 13. 5. I asked her how she found out. She said she had been working in Greyhaven's marketing office while our mother prepared a presentation about the resort's post-storm rebuilding. Their shared administrative mailbox contained old correspondence that had been imported during the server migration. She had searched Eleanor's name for photographs, and she had found an email from Thomas to Greyhaven's former insurer. Subject 9 included the words "Cancelled Rescue Request." I asked her what the email said. She said Dad wrote that dispatch had cancelled the first mission after receiving confirmation from Greyhaven that Grandma had already left. He said the later medical alert created confusion. I asked her if she still had the email. She said, "I do not know. The mailbox was archived when we changed providers." "Did you forward it, print it, screenshot it?" She said, "I forwarded it to my personal account because I wanted to ask Mom about it." I asked her if she still had that message. She said, "I think so." I said, "Do not open the attachment. Do not forward it to me. Call Allison. Tell her exactly where it is. Let her arrange preservation with your email provider." Brooke said, "You already have an attorney involved in everything." I said there is a difference between preserving an original message and sending me a screenshot that can be challenged later. She said, "This is what I mean." She said, "I am telling you, I helped them lie." And you are talking about email headers. She was not entirely wrong. I told her I was angry with her. I told her I also knew this was costing her something. Both things could be true. And then I asked her the question I had needed the answer to for a very long time. I said, "When you confronted Mom, what did she say?" Brooke said, "Mom told me the cancellation was only temporary." She said they believed the Bells had taken Grandma. She said they realized later there had been confusion. I said the Bell van was already through the checkpoint before the cancellation call. Brooke said I did not know that then. I said, "What did Mom ask you to do?" My sister said she told me to delete the email. She said if the truth came out, people would say, I abandoned Grandma too. She said Luke would look at me differently if he ever found out. I said, did you delete it from the Greyhaven mailbox? She said yes, but I never deleted the copy in my personal account. I asked her why she kept it. And what she said broke a small thing inside my chest that had been waiting to break for 13 years. She said because part of me knew I might need proof that I was not imagining what I saw. We met in person that afternoon in a quiet conference room at Allison's temporary office. Brooke came wearing jeans and a heavy coat and no makeup. Her wedding rehearsal manicure looked strangely formal against a paper coffee cup. Allison explained she represented me and not Brooke. She gave Brooke the names of 2 independent attorneys. Then she left the room. Brooke opened her personal account on her own laptop. She did not click the forwarded message. She showed me only the search result and the date while Allison arranged for a neutral forensic collection. The subject line read, Follow-up canceled rescue request and liability allocation. The message had been forwarded from Greyhaven's administrative account 5 years earlier. The preview text contained my father's name and the phrase resident previously removed. Brooke closed the laptop. She said I thought finding it would make me feel better. I said it rarely works that way, and then she told me about a second file. When Eleanor died 3 years earlier, Brooke had become personal representative of the estate. Our grandmother had left little, a savings account, personal belongings, and boxes of records she had insisted on keeping. Our mother had told me the estate was simple, that there was nothing requiring my involvement. Brooke had stored the files in Greyhaven's locked records room. Grandma had requested copies of her rehabilitation records after the storm. She had told Brooke she wanted the account in her own words, because everyone kept correcting her. And now that folder was still sitting inside Greyhaven. Brooke signed an authorization in her capacity as personal representative. She called Luke and asked him to bring the sealed estate box from Greyhaven. He did not ask why. He arrived 20 minutes later. He placed the box on the conference table. He looked at both of us and said, Is this about the wedding statement? Brooke said, It is about Grandma. Luke did not open the box. He handed it to her. She broke the estate seal she had placed there after probate closed, and she lifted out a rehabilitation folder, and inside was a certified social work note. And on that note, in a licensed social worker's handwriting, were the words my grandmother had said out loud during her recovery. Eleanor had reported that she had been left at the resort after her relatives departed. Eleanor had reported that she had been told an air crew would retrieve her later, and Eleanor had reported that she felt guilty because a crew member had been injured during the rescue. My grandmother had spent part of her recovery blaming herself for Lena's broken body. My sister pressed both hands over her mouth. Luke read the note twice. Then he looked at her. And he said your mother knew this existed. Brooke whispered, I do not know. Luke said, Did you? Brooke said, I knew there was a rehab folder. I never read it. He looked at her carefully. He said, I keep hearing that sentence. And I watched my sister flinch as if he had touched a burn. And then I did something small, something that felt bigger than any document we had produced that afternoon. I set the orange evacuation tag on the table beside the certified rehab note. I told them what it meant. That the registry code stamped into that plastic tag matched a certified county record proving Eleanor had been enrolled as a resident requiring assisted evacuation. That Greyhaven had acknowledged the registration before the hurricane season began, that the incident attestation claimed Eleanor had chosen to remain behind, and that the registry record proved she had done the opposite. She had done everything right. She had registered, she had worn the tag, she had followed the process, until someone at Greyhaven picked up a phone and said she was already gone. Brooke touched the edge of the certified record. She did not touch the tag. She said, I remember Mom taking that off Grandma's walker at the hospital. She said she did not. I said I found it on the walker after the rescue. Brooke's eyes closed. She said then she lied about that too. Luke walked to the window. He said, how many versions of this story are there? And I said one for every person Mom needed to control. Then Brooke's phone began vibrating. Connie's name lit the screen. Brooke let it ring. It rang again. And I told her something I hoped she would still be able to remember later. I said, do not discuss evidence. Do not agree to meet alone. Do not tell her where the estate folder is, Brooke answered, and she stepped into the hallway. I did not hear what my mother said, but I know what came next, because Luke told me. He returned to Greyhaven for an errand shortly after Brooke came back to the conference room pale and shaking. And in the shared printer tray in the management wing he found 4 pages that were not the wedding schedule he had gone to collect. He recognized the document properties at the top. Connie's name. It was a draft of her wedding toast. Most of it praised Brooke, Luke, and Greyhaven, but near the end, the tone changed. Connie had written about one daughter who had stayed loyal, and another who had spent years rejecting family and blaming others for the consequences of her own choices. The final line was underlined. Some women build families. Others spend their lives blaming. Luke folded the pages inside his coat. He did not confront her, not yet. He put them in an inside pocket, and he went to his own wedding, because he had already decided he needed to see what my mother would do when the microphone was in her hand and every camera in the room was pointed at her. That night, before the wedding, I stayed in my hotel. I checked 3 things before I fell asleep: my phone, my secure folder, and the orange tag on my keyring. Brooke sent me a message at 2:14 in the morning. I asked Mom to remove the part about you. Luke asked too. She said she would think about it. That was not reassurance. My mother never needed time to think when she planned to show mercy. She needed time when she was deciding how much damage she could cause without losing control of the room. I replied that I would keep my promise not to disrupt the ceremony. I did not ask Brooke to control our mother for me, because I already knew Connie was going to swing that microphone like a weapon. And I had already made peace with the fact that when she did, I would let her hit me in front of 200 witnesses. Because there's a moment in every story like this. A moment when the person who has spent their whole life defending themselves finally realizes something. Silence is a weapon too. And sometimes the strongest thing you can do is let a room see exactly who your mother is. So I did not sleep much. I checked the weather. I checked Gabriel's flight plan. I picked up my pearl earrings. And I waited. At 10 in the morning I drove to Greyhaven. The main building had been transformed overnight. Wide fabric framed the entrance. Winter greenery lined the staircase. Small glass lanterns flickered beneath the covered porch. The Atlantic beyond the dunes was deep blue under a clear sky. Wedding guests moved through the lobby carrying garment bags. Employees hurried between the kitchen and the pavilion. Every detail suggested celebration. But the staff spoke more quietly when Connie passed. I found the seating chart displayed near the reception entrance. My name appeared at table 14, beside a former vendor, 2 distant cousins, and 3 guests from Luca's side of the family whom I had never met. The family table sat near the dance floor. Table 14 sat beside the service doors at the rear of the room. My place card described me as an independent consultant. Brooks described her as Director of Brand Development, Greyhaven Retreat. Luke's card listed his law firm. Thomas was identified as co-founder of Greyhaven. Connie's card called her Managing Member and Community Resilience Advocate. Mine could have said Evacuation and Safety Planning Specialist. That is the description I had provided on the wedding information form. Instead, Connie had chosen language broad enough to sound temporary. Luke approached while I was still looking at the chart. He said I did not approve this. I said it is a table, not a life sentence. He said you should be with the family. I said I am exactly where Connie wants the unmarried version of me to be. His mouth tightened. He looked toward the staircase where Brooke's bridesmaids were carrying dress boxes upstairs. He said, "What would you do if you were me?" I said I would stop asking what explanation makes the past easier to accept. Then I would watch what she chooses when telling the truth costs her something. He nodded once. He did not thank me. Advice that matters rarely feels comforting when it is given. A staff member found me 20 minutes later. Thomas wanted to speak privately in the library. I said I would meet him in the lobby. He specifically requested the library, the staffer said. I said then, he can specifically walk out of it. Thomas appeared near the elevators before the employee could leave. He wore his wedding suit but no tie. A leather folder rested beneath his arm. "Mara," he said, "we need 5 minutes." I said we have already had the conversation. He said the document has been revised. I said I have already refused it. He glanced at the guests moving through the lobby. He lowered his voice. He said, "Your mother has agreed to remove the personal section from her toast." I said I did not know honesty required payment. He said, "This is not payment. It is a compromise." He opened the folder just enough for me to see the incident attestation and a black fountain pen clipped inside. The same pen, the same model, the same trick. My father believed that repetition would make the object feel inevitable. I took out my phone. I opened the voice memo app. Thomas stared at the screen. I said, "I am recording the time and terms of this conversation. You may leave if you do not consent." His face darkened, but he stayed. I stated the date, the location, his name. And then I said Thomas Whitaker has offered to remove defamatory personal remarks from Connie Whitaker's wedding toast if I sign the incident attestation. He said that is not what I said. I said correct it. He said the family is willing to avoid unnecessary conflict if you cooperate with a reasonable business request. I said, "Does Connie intend to make personal remarks about me if I do not sign?" He looked past me toward the front entrance. He said Mara. I said Thomas. She wrote the toast while angry. She wrote the toast this morning, I said. Has she agreed to remove the remarks without my signature? He did not answer. And that silence answered the question louder than his voice ever could have. I recorded that I had previously refused the attestation in writing, that my attendance did not constitute consent, that I would not sign. Then I stopped the memo and emailed the file directly to Allison. Tomas' composure cracked. He said, "You are turning every family conversation into evidence." I said, "You brought a contract to your daughter's wedding." He said, "You think that because you have Gabriel now, none of this can touch you." I said I had a life before you knew his name. "You are alone," he said. I said no, I was private. He pushed the folder toward me one last time. He said there are 43 employees whose jobs could be affected by what you are doing. I said, and you are still risking those jobs by asking me to sign something false. The ceremony coordinator called for the immediate family to gather. Thomas closed the folder so hard the fountain pen struck the leather. He said, "You always need to win." I said no. "I need my name removed from your lie." And I walked away. The ceremony took place inside the glass pavilion, while winter sunlight faded over the dunes. The heaters cast a soft warmth beneath the vaulted ceiling. White branches, ivory roses, small candles surrounded the aisle. I sat at the end of the second row close enough to see Lukey's hands tremble when Brooke appeared, and for that 1 hour I let myself feel only what belonged to the moment. Because my sister had lied. She had stayed silent after learning more. She had helped bring me home under incomplete pretenses. And none of that erased the years when she followed me through the house, borrowed my clothes without asking, called me from college because she was afraid she had chosen the wrong major. Love did not require me to deny what she had done. And anger did not require me to deny that I still loved her. When Brooke reached Luke, her eyes filled. He took her hands. He looked directly at her while they spoke their vows. He did not withdraw from the promise because of what he had learned. He also did not pretend the promise solved it. I cried when she said his name. The photographer captured it. Later, Connie tried to arrange the family for photographs. She positioned herself between Thomas and Brooke. She called me closer. "Mara, stand beside your sister," she said brightly. I understood exactly why she wanted the photograph. Because I had read the email chain. But I stood beside Brooke anyway. And my smile was real. That did not make Connie's narrative true. It just meant she did not own every emotion visible on my face. In one frame, Brooke reached for my hand. I let her hold it until the camera lowered. She said thank you for the picture. For coming, I believed her. That was what made the rest of the evening harder. The reception began at 6. My table remained at the rear. But Luke quietly moved my place card to the family table. Connie noticed immediately. She said nothing while guests were watching. At 6:23, Allison sent me a secure message. The insurer's archive custodian had located the dispatch audio export under the mission code. The file's original archive hash matched the value created when it entered legal hold 13 years earlier. A records custodian was preparing a certification. The audio existed. We still did not know exactly what it contained. No one on my side had opened it. Authentication comes before interpretation. I read the message once. I locked my phone. A second message arrived from Gabriel. Drill complete, departing for airport. Flight remains on schedule. I placed the phone beside my champagne. Across the room, Thomas leaned toward Connie and said something I could not hear. His eyes moved briefly toward me. Connie's expression did not change. She knew preservation notices had been sent. She knew Naomi had surfaced. She knew I had refused the attestation. She did not know the archive custodian had located the audio. What she knew was enough to frighten her. What she did not know allowed her to believe she could still control the room. The plates were cleared. The band lowered the music. Luca's best man gave a short toast. Brooke's college roommate followed. Both speeches were warm and mercifully ordinary. And then Connie rose. Brooke reached for her wrist. I could not hear what my sister said. Later, both Brooke and Luke confirmed that she asked our mother to use the shorter version of the toast and leave me out of it. Connie removed Brooke's hand gently, smiling, as if reassuring a nervous bride. Thomas stared down at his place setting, and the microphone passed into my mother's hand. She began with Luke. She praised his patience, his education, his loyalty. She called Brooke the daughter who had remained close to home, who had helped rebuild Greyhaven into a place worthy of the next generation. Guests smiled. Glasses lifted. And then Connie looked directly at me. Her voice remained warm enough to disguise the blade. Brooke found a wonderful man who adores her, she said. Some women know how to build a life people want to join. Others spend years blaming everyone else because no man wants them. The laughter after her insult lasted only a few seconds. But it changed the temperature of the room. A fork struck a plate near the back tables. The pavilion heaters hummed above us, and beyond the glass walls the January wind moved through the dune grass in long silver waves. Brooke stared at our mother. Luke's hand closed around the stem of his glass. Thomas looked down as though refusing to witness the moment might excuse him from it. My phone lit beside my plate. 6 minutes out. I did not need Gabriel to rescue me from a cruel speech. I had survived far worse than my mother's opinion of whether a man could love me. But Connie had chosen the exact moment when the life she had never bothered to learn was approaching Greyhaven's lawn from the northwest. I set down my champagne. I said, "You keep asking about my husband. Funny thing, you have already met him." Connie gave me a patient smile meant for the guests rather than for me. "Of course I have," she said. "And where is this husband, Mara? Did he get lost on the way to the wedding?" That was when the glass behind her began to vibrate. At first, it sounded like distant construction. Several guests looked toward the ceiling. Then the sound deepened. Rotor blades. Venue staff moved immediately. The doors leading to the lawn were closed. 2 attendants in reflective jackets checked the fenced perimeter around Greyhaven's licensed teleport. Guests remained inside. The helicopter approached from the northwest exactly as filed hours earlier. My mother's speech had not summoned it. Her timing had only ensured that it would arrive while everyone was still watching me. She lowered the microphone as the aircraft descended into the landing lights. Rotor wash flattened the grass, rattled the bare branches beyond the fence. Inside the pavilion, the candles flickered behind their glass covers. When the aircraft settled, the crew completed its shutdown procedures before anyone approached. A ground attendant opened the passenger door and escorted Gabriel along the marked path toward the pavilion. Whispers spread through the reception before he even reached the building. Some guests recognized him from business publications. Others recognized the name of Rourke Response Systems when it moved from table to table. Connie recognized something else. Her fingers tightened around the microphone. She had seen this man 13 years earlier, before his company existed, before financial magazines estimated his personal stake at more than $5 billion. Under fluorescent hospital lights, when she had leaned close to him and told him a story that would define the next 13 years of my life. Gabriel removed his gloves as he crossed the pavilion. He did not come directly to me. He first stopped beside Brooke and Luke. "I apologize for arriving during the speeches," he said. "Congratulations to both of you." Luke stood and shook his hand. Brooke managed a quiet thank you, though. Her eyes moved repeatedly between Gabriel and our mother. Only then did he come to my chair. He rested one hand lightly against the back of it. "I am sorry I missed dinner, wife." The room reacted more loudly to that single word than it had to the helicopter. I stood, and he kissed my cheek. It was not a theatrical kiss. It was not a claim made for the audience. It was the same greeting he gave me when one of us returned late from work. Connie found her voice first. "So this was your plan," she said. "You hid a wealthy husband and waited until Brooke's wedding to humiliate us." I said my marriage is not a family asset you were entitled to inventory. She said you let everyone believe you were alone. I said I allowed you to believe whatever required the least effort from you. Thomas rose from his chair. He said, "This is not appropriate. Luke said your wife is holding the microphone." Gabriel looked toward Connie. I felt the room waiting for him to threaten her. To mention his attorneys. To announce that Greyhaven's grant had already been destroyed. He did none of those things. "The last time Mrs. Whitaker and I met," he said, "she gave me an account of a rescue mission. I repeated part of that account in an official report without verifying it properly." Connie's mouth tightened. "She said I told you what I knew." He said you told me Mara had used a family dispute to justify the mission. He said the medical alert was valid, the mission was authorized. My comment about Mara's judgment was unsupported, and I corrected it in a sworn statement. He did not mention the archive, the insurer, the grant administrator, the audio we had not yet heard. He spoke only about his own conduct. And the facts he could personally establish. Connie turned toward the guests. "Do you see what she has done?" she said. "She brought him here to revive a tragedy at her sister's wedding." Gabriel said I was invited as her husband. I said you chose the subject. Thomas stepped closer to Connie. He said this needs to end. And then I asked my mother in front of 200 witnesses, the one question I had carried for 13 years. I said, "Why did you cancel the rescue?" The room became silent enough that I could hear the air system clicking above us. Connie's face did not collapse. She had spent too many years defending the story to surrender, because I finally asked the question publicly. She said I did not cancel anything. Thomas answered before I could. He said we were told Eleanor was safe. I turned toward him. I said, "Who told you?" He stared at me. He said the bells had already passed the checkpoint. I said, "Who told you she was safe?" He said that is not a conversation for this room. I said you just answered for Mom in this room. He looked toward Connie, but she did not help him. Luke walked to the center of the pavilion. He held out his hand for the microphone. He said, "This is my wedding reception. No one else is using it to threaten, shame, or pressure anyone. The speeches are finished." Connie did not release the microphone. Brooke stood beside her. She said, "Mom, that was all it took." My sister said one word, and my mother handed the microphone to Luke. Gabriel sat beside me after Luke moved an extra chair to the family table. "You kept your promise," I said. He said I answered only what I knew. He said you also missed the cake. I said I was told marriage required sacrifice. I laughed despite myself. The tension in my shoulders eased for the first time that evening. Across the room, Thomas took Brooke by the elbow and guided her toward the corridor near the kitchens. I saw his mouth moving. I could not hear the conversation. Brooke returned several minutes later without approaching me. I did not decide what she was thinking. I did not assume she had chosen our parents again simply because she remained beside them during the final dances. Later, Brooke and Luke separately told me what Thomas had said. He warned her that if she testified about seeing Eleanor in the window, every reviewer would ask why she had lied at 19, why she had deleted the email as an adult. He said Luke would learn that his wife had protected herself while her grandmother waited upstairs. Thomas had presented truth as the thing that would expose Brooke, rather than the only action that might allow her to become someone different. She did not answer him that night. The reception ended without another speech. Gabriel and I returned to my hotel instead of staying at Greyhaven. Brooke left with Luke. Connie posed for photographs until the last guests departed. I thought that was the end of it. For 2 days, no one from my family contacted me. And then, on Monday afternoon, Allison called me while I was at her office. She said the grant administrator received an attestation bearing your signature. I looked at the empty space on the table between us. I said, "When?" She said, "Uploaded yesterday evening." I said I did not sign anything. She said, "They know." My preservation notice had required independent verification before anyone relied on a document using my identity. The administrator had not merely emailed Greyhaven to ask whether the signature was genuine. Its compliance officer contacted Allison through the number listed in the preservation notice. At the same time, the portal operator locked the submission, preserved the audit logs, restricted further changes to the file. By the time Connie and Thomas learned that verification had begun, the technical record was already outside their control. Allison opened the secured copy while a compliance officer remained on video. The document used the revised language Thomas had brought to the wedding. It claimed that Eleanor's status had been misunderstood during an emergency, that no person at Greyhaven had intentionally supplied false information, that I supported using the rescue as evidence of the resort's institutional improvement. My name appeared beneath it. The signature was mine. But I had not written it there. It was an image copied from an old professional report. Every angle, every gap, every ink variation matched the earlier signature exactly. That alone was a strong indicator of duplication. But it was not the only evidence. The portal audit showed the file had been uploaded through Connie's unique administrator account. Her login required multi-factor authentication, and the approval request had been confirmed through the registered device assigned to her. Thomas' separate account had then attested that he personally witnessed me sign the document at Greyhaven on Saturday night. The stated signing time was 8:42. At 8:42, I had been at my hotel. My parking receipt showed my rental car had entered the hotel lot shortly after 8. My room key opened the elevator vestibule minutes later. The lobby camera recorded me speaking with the front desk manager before I went upstairs. Gabriel had been traveling from the county center to the airport at that time. Allison had been in Monteo. No one connected to me had access to Greyhaven's portal. The metadata supported the audit trail. The signature image had been inserted after my written refusal, after Thomas failed to obtain my signature at the wedding. But metadata was not carrying the case alone. We had the locked portal logs, multi-factor confirmation, witness attestation, original source signature, and independent proof that I was not present. Allison closed the file. She said they did not just repeat the old lie, they created a new record and submitted it to obtain a current financial benefit. I thought about the fountain pen Thomas had pushed toward me, the photographs Connie had arranged, her confidence that seeing me smile beside Brooke would make strangers believe our family had reconciled. They had tried pressure first. When pressure failed, they had replaced my consent with an image. And they had walked directly into the trap I had set with a single sentence in a preservation notice weeks earlier. I gave them 24 hours. Not 1 hour of privacy did I owe those people anymore. But I gave them 24 hours to withdraw the attestation, report the false signature to the grant administrator themselves, preserve every device, surrender temporary access to Greyhaven's portal. No threats, no bargaining, no private settlement. Allison sent the notice to Connie and Thomas at 9 the next morning. Connie called me 11 minutes later. She said, "You have made your point." I said, "I did not create the document." She said, "You know what I mean. You wanted us frightened, and now we are frightened." I said I wanted you to withdraw a false filing. And then she tried the last card she had. She said, "Your father and I are prepared to transfer part of our membership interest in Greyhaven to you. In exchange, if I spoke to the grant administrator and explained the signature was added after a verbal understanding, if I said the document reflected what I had intended to approve." I almost admired how quickly she converted her exposure into a transaction. I said that would be another false statement. She said you would have a meaningful share of the family business. Gabriel could help modernize the property. I said Gabriel is not investing in Greyhaven. She said this is not about his money. And I said it became about his money the moment he finished crossing the reception floor. She was silent long enough for me to hear a printer start in the background. She said everything I did was to keep this place alive. And I said you left Grandma upstairs to protect it. Then you used my name to protect it again. She said I made one impossible decision during a hurricane. And I said you made hundreds of decisions after the storm. She said you have always wanted control. Now I am offering it to you. I said you still think everyone has a price. Because that is how you explain your own choices. I ended the call. The deadline did not change. Thomas contacted Allison privately that afternoon. He said he had wanted to withdraw the submission as soon as verification began. He said Connie had refused. 3 hours before the deadline, he sent an email chain to the portal operator, the compliance officer, and Allison. The messages showed Connie directing the wedding photograph strategy, asking how to make my attendance appear to support reconciliation, instructing the consultant to keep my name in the application. Connie responded by sending a memorandum through her own attorney. It claimed Thomas had controlled the attestation process, that he had maintained the evacuation roster, that he had assured her I had consented. They had protected each other for 13 years, and now the same lie threatened both of them, and they began supplying evidence against each other. I forwarded every communication to the proper record custodians. The deadline passed without a self-report. Brooke called the following morning. She said, "I am giving them my phone." I said, "Give it to your attorney or the forensic examiner." Not to me. Her independent counsel arranged a forensic copy of every message between her and Connie. The extraction included the message in which Connie said photographs of us smiling would make the statement difficult to challenge. It also included a message sent after Brooke asked her to remove the insult from the wedding toast. If Mara signs, there will be nothing to say. If she refuses, people deserve to understand why she is doing this. My mother had not lost control during that speech. She had used humiliation as the punishment attached to my refusal. Brooke gave a formal statement about seeing Eleanor at the upstairs window. She admitted lying to the original review at 19. She admitted deleting the Greyhaven email as an adult. She produced the copy preserved in her personal account. And she did not ask anyone to describe her decisions more kindly than they deserved. Luke moved into a short-term rental. He did not file for divorce at the reception. He did not decide anything in front of our family. He told Brooke that he needed to see whether she would keep telling the truth after the immediate fear passed. She accepted that. Without asking me to persuade him. 7 weeks after the wedding, the Atlantic Coastal Rescue Cooperative convened its record correction panel. The panel had one limited purpose. It could determine whether the mission record and the professional findings were accurate. It could not prosecute my mother. It could not decide ownership of Greyhaven. It could not award damages. I sat beside Allison in a plain conference room. Lena attended with her own counsel. Gabriel sat several seats away because his affidavit was evidence, not authority. The panel began with Eleanor's accessible evacuation registration. The certified county record matched the number on the orange tag I had carried for 13 years. It established Eleanor as a resident requiring assisted evacuation. That Greyhaven had acknowledged that need before the hurricane season began. Nama's incident card showed the initial request and the later cancellation. The cooperative's telephone records confirmed both calls came from Greyhaven's registered landline. Eleanor's medical alert proved she remained inside after the caller said she had already been removed. The Bell passenger list and checkpoint record disproved Thomas' declaration that Eleanor had left in their van. June Bell's certified statement confirmed that Thomas told them another arrangement had been made. Elaine Porter presented the weather analysis. She did not promise that an earlier flight would have prevented Lynette's injury. She explained that the false cancellation delayed the mission, reduced the crew's weather margin, increased our exposure to the stronger band. The hard landing still had multiple contributing factors. The rehabilitation facility certified Eleanor's intake note, her report that Connie told her the family vehicle was full, her guilt over Linus' injury. Gabriel's affidavit came next. He stated that Connie had described me as using the rescue to settle a family conflict, that he had repeated an unsupported interpretation in his report. He accepted responsibility for failing to verify her account before attaching professional weight to it, and then the record's custodian authenticated the dispatch audio. And Connie's voice filled the room. I want you to picture this. A plain conference room, cold coffee cups, a recording device sitting in the middle of a wooden table, and my mother's 13-year-old voice coming out of a speaker. She said Eleanor had already been removed by a neighbor. Naomi asked for the neighbor's name. Connie refused to provide it. She insisted no responders come to Greyhaven and create a scene. The recording was not dramatic. My mother did not shout. She did not confess that she wanted Eleanor harmed. Her voice was practical, impatient, and certain that protecting the property justified ending the call. That ordinary tone made it worse, because that was the voice of my mother making a choice, not a mistake. A choice. Calmly, efficiently. In the middle of a hurricane, above her own mother's head, the panel corrected the mission record. It found that Eleanor was a verified endangered resident, that my decision to launch had a legitimate operational basis. That false information from Greyhaven caused an unnecessary delay. It removed the unsupported statement concerning my judgment. It documented the weather, equipment movement, and other factors involved in Lena's injury without turning any one of them into a convenient single cause. The chair asked whether I wanted to make a final statement. I said, correcting my record matters. But it also needs to state that the rescue team did not abandon Eleanor. We came when the system finally told us she was still there, and the amended finding included that distinction. Later that week, a separate compliance conference addressed the forged attestation. The grant application was suspended and referred for investigation. The insurer issued notice that it would not renew Greyhaven's policy after the contractual cure period, because of material misrepresentation and governance risk. It did not close the resort that afternoon. It gave the LLC and its lender time to establish acceptable management and coverage. That notice activated the insurance covenant in Greyhaven's commercial loan. The lender could have declared default and begun foreclosure proceedings. Instead, it offered a forbearance agreement designed to preserve the operating business. Connie and Thomas accepted, because the alternative placed the entire property at risk. They surrendered management access. An independent turnaround manager took control of finances, compliance, insurance negotiations, and daily operations. Greyhaven's revenue entered a monitored account that prioritized debt service, safety upgrades, and costs arising from the reviews. Employees who had not participated in the false filings kept their jobs. Bookings continued under outside supervision. I received no ownership interest. Gabriel provided no loan, no investment, no guarantee. When Connie learned I had refused every path to acquiring Greyhaven, she asked Allison what I wanted from her. My answer remained the same, an accurate record. The County Emergency Preparedness Council removed Connie at a public meeting after reviewing the corrected mission findings. The plaque bearing her name disappeared from Greyhaven's entrance before spring. Thomas continued cooperating with investigators in the hope of reducing his responsibility. Connie moved out of their shared residence and blamed him publicly for the attestation. No divorce had been finalized by the time I sat down to tell this story. The law enforcement investigation into the current false filing remained open. Consequences did not arrive in one satisfying afternoon. They came through letters, meetings, account restrictions, corrected records, and drawers that no longer opened when my mother pressed her access card against a reader. Lena agreed to help design what we now call the Eleanor Protocol, a program for coastal facilities serving guests with mobility and oxygen needs. She made it clear that working together did not restore the trust we had once had. She said, "I can believe the record now. Believing you again will take longer." I said, "I know." Brooke asked to meet me in June, 5 months after the wedding. We sat outside a quiet cafe while summer traffic moved toward the islands. She asked, "Do you think we can ever be sisters again?" I said, "Not the way we were." I said the old version required me to carry everyone's secrets. It required you to love me privately and choose them publicly. I will not return to that. She asked, "Is there another version?" I said there might be if you keep telling the truth when it costs you. She nodded. I did not promise forgiveness on a schedule, but I stayed until we finished our coffee. And then, in July, on a clear morning at a small airfield, I did something I had not done in 13 years. I completed a new medical clearance, recurrent ground school, simulator sessions, a formal flight review. I completed the required recent takeoffs and landings with a certified helicopter flight instructor. The instructor occupied the right seat. Gabriel watched from behind the hangars marked safety line, his hands in his pockets, and no authority over the aircraft. I completed the pre-flight inspection myself. The controls, fuel, instruments, emergency equipment, rotor area. When the instructor gave the command, I raised the helicopter into a controlled hover. For years, I had believed clearing my name would return something the storm had taken from me. It did not. It did not restore Lena's career. It did not give back Eleanor's lost hours. It did not restore the 26-year-old version of me who had believed evidence would matter just because it was true. What it restored was choice. I eased the aircraft forward. I increased power. The runway fell away beneath us. Gabriel became smaller beside the hangar. The coastline opened ahead bright beneath the morning sun. And this time, when the ground fell away beneath me, it was because I had chosen to rise. Now I need to talk to you, whoever you are on the other side of this screen. Because if you have made it this far, there is a reason. Maybe you know Akani. Maybe you are the child at the back of the car who saw something through a window and was told to be quiet. Maybe you are the one carrying an orange tag in your pocket that no one else has ever noticed. Listen to me. You may love your family, but love does not require you to sign false documents. Love does not require you to hide wrongdoing. Love does not require you to carry blame that belongs to someone else. When people pressure you to keep the peace, ask whose peace your silence is protecting. Real reconciliation begins with honesty, responsibility, and changed behavior. Not public smiles, not family photographs, not promises made only after consequences appear. Preserve important messages. Read every document before signing. Get qualified legal advice when necessary. Keep your finances, your transportation, and your housing independent when you are dealing with controlling relatives. Evidence is most powerful when it is collected lawfully, stored safely, presented through the proper process. Revenge should never destroy innocent employees, children, or bystanders. Let the truth create fair consequences for the people who made the harmful choices. You do not have to forgive quickly. You do not have to rebuild a relationship just because someone finally admits what they did. Watch what they do after the apology, especially when honesty costs them something. Protecting your name is not selfish. Setting boundaries is not cruelty. Accepting help does not make you weak. And you are not too late. Do you hear me? You are not too late. I was 26 when a woman I loved lied about me in a hospital corridor. I was 39 when a stranger sent me an old piece of paper in a photograph. I was 40 when a helicopter landed on a wedding lawn and my mother's voice finally came out of a speaker in a room full of witnesses. If it took me 13 years, then it can take you one more day. One more phone call. One more conversation with a lawyer. One more moment of refusing to sign what you know is not true. There is a version of you standing on the other side of this, choosing to rise. And she is waiting for you to come and get her. If this story reached something in you tonight, if it reminded you of a person you love, or a person you used to be, or a person you have not yet allowed yourself to become, do one small thing before you close this. Hit the like button so more people carrying an orange tag in their pocket can find this story. Subscribe so the next time a story like this arrives, you do not miss it. And in the comments, tell me one word, just one. The word for the thing you have been carrying in silence. You do not have to explain it. You do not have to justify it. Just leave the word, because someone else reading tonight is going to see it, and they are going to know they are not alone. That is how we rise together. One word. One breath. One quiet act of telling the truth. Thank you for staying with me all the way to the end. I will see you in the next story.